presented by Miss Aisha Kamal and Miss Rachel Dance from Jumeirah Baccalaureate School. Please go on.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. I'm Aisha Kamal. I'm Head of Inclusion at Jumeirah Baccalaureate School. This is my colleague.
Hi, I'm Rachel Jacks. I'm the school nurse at Jumeirah Baccalaureate School, but I actually run and coordinate the ADHD support group here in Dubai for children and also for adults.
So this afternoon, you'll get a brief introduction of our school context, the links with ADHD to the DSIB indicators, what ADHD is, some statistics around it, how we support students with ADHD at JBS. Rachel will talk more about the ADHD support group. There's some websites for you to refer to, and then it will be open to question and answer. So just a brief introduction. We're based in Jumeirah 1. We opened in 2010. So we're a relatively new school. We're pre-K through to grade 12, 853 students, so we're not very big, 71 different nationalities, 281 students on the inclusion register, so that's 33% of the school. We're IPC in primary with numeracy and literacy as national curriculum, MYP in secondary, and diploma in grade 11 and 12. So the quality indicators that ADHD links to directly, health and safety and care and support, but thinking broader in terms of ADHD impacting on every teacher, every professional, every adult in the school, it will link through to attitudes and behaviour, teaching for effective learning, assessment and curriculum design as well. So there needs to be an awareness around all of those things. Pretend you didn't see the next slide. Okay, thinking about ADHD, what three things come to mind? So if somebody said to you ADHD or a child with ADHD, can you note down on your yellow or orange post-it 3 words that come to mind? So any 3 words at all. Right, so going to ask row by row just for one of the words on your post-it. So anybody in the front row, one of the words. Impulsive. Second row? Restless. Hyperactive. Difficult in handling. Fidgety. At times aggressive. Poor concentration. Back row, have you had a chance? You haven't had a chance, you've just come in. Okay, the row just in front. Sensory issues. Social problems. Attention seeking. Short attention span.
Violence sometimes. Display violence.
Can display violence. Okay. All absolutely valid and correct. It's a visual representation of what ADHD can represent for different children. Key thing that we tend to notice as educators is we notice ADHD when it impacts on our teaching and our lessons and our learning. So more often than not, if somebody says ADHD, the connotations are negative, or it's how to address a problem or a difficulty or a challenge. And Rachel's going to talk you through the next part.
I'm going to hold it. So ADHD, as we know, comes in 3 different types. Predominantly hyperactive, predominantly inattentive, or a combination of the 2. Predominantly hyperactive children are the ones that are fidgety, restless, can't sit still, climbing the walls, often very impulsive. The inattention child, the predominantly inattentive child, is the one that's daydreaming, often can't focus, can't stay on track, easily distracted within the classroom. And our combination type is obviously a combination of all of those two. The DSMI, or the NICE guidelines are the UK guidelines for diagnosing ADHD, and the DSM are the ones that are the guidelines for diagnosing ADHD in the United States, say that ADHD has to be seen in more than one setting. So it can't just be a child who's showing ADHD symptoms at home. It's also got to be a child that's showing it in school or in the community centre or out with their peers. It's got to have been present from before the age of 7 years of age. It can't just be a teenage problem that they suddenly develop. And those guidelines are here in your handout too for you to be able to take a look at later. The statistics on ADHD are really quite interesting. This is just another graph there just to show you the different amounts of ADHD. Predominantly combined is what we often see a lot of here. So statistically, we reckon that about 10% of children worldwide have ADHD. 4% of adults worldwide also have ADHD as well, which is a huge amount. I see increasingly in the ADHD support group that a lot of children, when they're diagnosed with ADHD, the parents are actually diagnosed at the same time. They recognise the symptoms in themselves. Back in the early 80s, they said in the UK there were only about 12 cases of ADHD that had actually been diagnosed, some ridiculously low number. And now if we think about it, in every school here in the UAE, there are children diagnosed with ADHD. It surprises me as part of the support group. Some schools don't actually recognise it. I met a school recently with 1,400 children, and they had 3 cases of ADHD in their school that was actually diagnosed. So there's still an awful lot more children that we're not actually catching out there. 46% of students in a recent study were actually reported to have been suspended with ADHD, and 11% of those were actually expelled. In the UK, recently, I think about 3 years ago, the UK has said that any child that's about to be expelled from school should actually undergo testing for ADHD before they're expelled, because it's not the solution to expel a child with ADHD. If you understand them, you can actually help them an awful lot. So the difference we can make is huge. Predominantly boys have ADHD, but girls do have ADHD. Here it tells us 5.6% of girls. Girls are often misdiagnosed again as being daydreamers. They don't pay attention in class. They're the ones that don't follow through, often more inattentive than hyperactive. This is a study from the States, and they reckon on here that 5.2 million children in the United States alone have ADHD. The next slide is just an interesting one from the UK. It said in 2000, the amount of prescriptions that were actually written for children receiving medication was about 269,000. In 2012, it was over 1 million prescriptions were being written for medication for ADHD. So the amounts have actually grown. It's a huge amount of children now that are suffering with ADHD. The diagnosis of a child with ADHD is often a long process. My son has ADHD, which is why I started the support group. And that process takes about 6 to 12 weeks. It's a long process, and it should be. It's not a process that can take half an hour in a doctor's surgery. It's a process that needs assessment using different criteria, where they'll be assessed for their intelligence, for their motor skills. And obviously it needs to be someone that can look for the symptoms too. Often ADHD can be misdiagnosed because it's being masked by other symptoms. Depression and anxiety are very common, and we estimate that about 50% of children with ADHD have another comorbid condition. So that also needs to be taken into account when you're assessing these children, to make sure that you address the ADHD symptoms as well as the other comorbid condition. My son has Asperger's, and so that's something that we have to take into account when we're treating him and helping him in school to make sure that he achieves the best that he can achieve. I love this next slide, and I wanted to put my son in the middle of it. ADHD children are amazing children, and as a parent of an ADHD child, I think they're some of the most stunningly handsome, gorgeous children that you can find on the planet. They're vivacious, they're exciting, they're impulsive, they have a wonderful personality. He would love to be stood here in front of you today. They say that cavemen should have been ADHD because they wouldn't have stopped to think about whether the tiger was going to kill them, because they'd have gone out and killed the tiger first to make sure they had dinner on the table, where someone that didn't have ADHD would have actually sat to think about whether it was safe to go and do it. Did they need a health and safety assessment to go and do it? So ADHD children have some amazing qualities, and we shouldn't forget that. They are fantastic children, and actually they're very intelligent children. My son's on the 98th percentile, and without the help and support that he's received at school, I don't believe he would ever have achieved the success that he has in school without getting the right support. So giving our children the right support in school is so very, very important.
Right, which leads me nicely to getting the right support in school. So as head of inclusion, any child who's deemed to have ADHD will be seen by me first. I'm not the person who makes the diagnosis. I'm not equipped or qualified to do that. That's got to be done by an external specialist. But as Rachel said, as our head nurse in school, she has lots of parents who come to see her, lots of teachers who come to see her, lots of students who come to see her. And either children will come into school diagnosed, or they'll come into school and then we'll raise a concern that there may be a difficulty with attention, or there may be a barrier with such and such, and let's investigate together and see where we go. So I can't keep calm. I have ADHD. It's not a choice. It's not a decision. And as educators, I think it's really difficult to remember that. But ADHD students, it's not a choice. It's something they struggle with. And they struggle with lots of things that are common every day. So listening to instructions, coming in and being organised, having the right books out in front of them, having the right equipment. So these are basics that we would expect from every student in our class, more so in secondary than in primary. But for an ADHD child, these are not ordinary expectations. They can be, but sometimes those students may need some support with that. So they struggle with things that other students can find relatively easy or straightforward. So what can we do to help? Some basic strategies that require no planning, no preparation, almost nothing except thought and consideration, is making eye contact with an ADHD child before speaking to them. Cueing them in by their name. So saying, Ali, the instructions for this lesson are going to be, and then you start. So it's something gentle, it's something, almost unnoticeable. But for Ali, it's going to mean you cue him in immediately. Checking for understanding. So that doesn't mean after I've given the instruction, I say, Ali, tell me what I've just said. Does not mean that. But a nice way, a gentle way, again, a seamless way is saying, right, buddy up with somebody, explain what you have to do to the other person to check they've understood. So paired working, helping them sequence and link learning. Again, one of those things that we take as automatic. They know the lesson we did previously links to this lesson today, links to the next lesson, links to the final essay or poster or research project or presentation they've got to do. But for an ADHD child, that lesson finished yesterday. X million number of things have happened in between. Their mind is racing. They're thinking about the bird outside the window. They're thinking about, a teacher walking in the corridor whose heels are clip-clopping. They're thinking about something they saw on TV yesterday. That lesson yesterday, in period 8, last lesson of the day, has no relevance to what you're doing period 3 today. Unless you say to them, what we did yesterday, where we looked at links with this because we will use that to do this. So making those links really explicit. Be clear and specific with instructions. So if the words don't need to be there, don't use them. If you talk, they lose the important bits of that message. And it just becomes background noise. It becomes a lot of background noise. And they can't decipher and pick out what's important in that message. Giving time to think, to plan, and to talk. So cueing them in and saying, right, now you've got 3 minutes. Giving a time limit so they know this isn't going to go on forever. You've got 3 minutes to identify X, Y, and Z with your partner. Go. And a visual timer. So if you've got interactive boards, they all come with a tool that has a timer. If not, a cooking timer, an egg timer, anything. But timers work really, really well. In the back of your handout, there are 3 pages of strategies. I'm not going to go through all of them because you have them. They're all self-explanatory. You can take them away. But what I will do is I will highlight a couple of the really important ones. ADHD students do not necessarily have, or don't always have, it looks like that minus the highlighting. They don't necessarily have the same emotional awareness as other students. So they may be frustrated, but they may be able to articulate that frustration. They may be angry, but they may not know why. So anticipating and avoiding problems as a teacher is key. It's really crucial. Giving reminders and warnings about changing and changes that happen through the day. ADHD children don't respond well to change in general. If it's self-initiated change, it's fantastic. And you know, they're very impulsive, they're very fluid, they can go with the flow, but if it's changing the lesson structure or the day structure, they need to know in advance. Praising the right behavior and managing behavior at the point of performance, so where it counts. Not picking on everything because that's too much and it's too demoralizing and it's going to affect their self-esteem. So pick your battles. If it's something small, think, can I let it slide? It's not impacting on their learning, it's not impacting on my teaching, it's not impacting on anybody else. Does it matter? You know, if somebody needs to walk around the classroom to think about something, it's not going to impact on anything greatly. I had a student last year who was in grade 10 who regularly just used to walk around the room. And the children get used to it. It means nothing to anybody else, but to him it was the difference between him coping with the lesson and staying on task, or him having an incident. So walking around the classroom, not a big deal for me. I even ended up going out and buying a beanbag. So everybody else is sitting at a table working. When it's extended individual working, he sat on a beanbag. It worked well for him. Headphones. They can be plugged into something, so they can be listening to music, but sometimes this student would just have headphones on his head. They weren't plugged into anything, but it just cancelled out a lot of excess noise. So no music. Sometimes he had music, sometimes he didn't. Being firm and fair, having consistency and structure, limiting waiting time. Waiting time does not work well for ADHD children. Verbalizing the learning process, so letting them know what the steps are. Having layered objectives, so there's something achievable for them. Having success criteria, so they know I need to do X, Y, and Z to have success in this lesson. This is what Miss is looking for. This is what I need to be able to show by the end of the lesson. This is what I need to understand to be able to talk about, to have written down. Another thing that worked really well for this student, which again doesn't require any money or anything other than yourself, is just a gentle touch or a cue between you. So with this student, when things were escalating and he was becoming really hyper and was starting to interfere with other people, I would walk over to the whiteboard, I would just do a line, a tally, so just a straight line, and I would knock, knock, knock. So he knew if I did the knock, 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 that was for him. And if it got to 5 tallies, all it meant was we were going to have a conversation about what's going on. You're not yourself today, you're not working well. What can I do to help? Is there something you can do to help yourself? So that was the consequence. 5 tallies, we speak. So nothing huge, nothing demoralizing, but equally, if within the next 3 minutes, and I turned a timer then, he was working well and he was on task, I would go over and wipe that tally out. Slate's clean. For an ADHD child, if they get to somewhere extreme, sometimes they can just lose all focus and it's like, I'm not trying now. What's the point? I've lost such and such. You've lost me. So an opportunity to earn something back is really, really crucial. And like I said, the consequence for 5 tallies were just we talk. So it wasn't anything big, it wasn't anything heavy. Prompts to stay on task. Tangle toys, they're not very expensive, but if you don't have a budget for things like that, things like blue tack. I recommended rubber bands to somebody once and it didn't work out well because they started pinging them. But if they start to build up a rubber band ball, that works. Or one of the girls that I taught with ADHD, she loved paper clips. She used to open the paper clips, unbend them, bend them back, make linking chains, but she was listening and she was talking. She was focusing. It might not look like she was, but she was. Color coding works really well. So, you know, if you're doing something on energy, anything to do with solar energies in blue, anything to do with nuclear energies in green, anything to do with wind energies in yellow, so they can visually see their learning. Preferential seating, so what works well for the student? Sometimes teachers say, right at the front by me works really well. For another student who I tried it with was awful, because by the front meant they were by the door, and all they were doing is looking at what was going on in the corridor. So you see what works best for your student. It's going to be different things. And the last thing that I've used that works really well for me, for my students, which may or may not work for you, but it's worth a try, is a doodle pad. So all of my ADHD students have a little notebook, and they can scribble in it and draw in it and write in it as I'm talking, and then I just check back with them later to make sure they are listening, and I have to say 9 times out of 10 they are. That doodling and scribbling just helps them to concentrate. The other thing you've got on the end of that list is test exam accommodations. If a student has an ADHD diagnosis, they are entitled to all of these things. So extra time, a reader, a scribe if it helps, typing on a laptop, things like that. So please do look into accommodations for your ADHD children, because it can make the difference between them doing well in a test and them not. For some students, being in a separate room works well as well, which we have done in the past. Last thing I'll refer to is an individual behaviour plan. Not every student who has ADHD has this in our school, but the students who don't have an academic barrier, so academically they're doing fine, it's just behaviour or attention or focus, we do have an individual behaviour plan. And with this, everybody involved in the child is involved. So you've got the key information at the top, summary of information, which is from the educational psychologist report, that's not from us. So it's literally copied from the report. Communication with the parents. And then just a list of strategies that I have found work well with that student. And this is shared with every teacher who works with that student. So there's that firm but fair, that consistency, that structure. Everybody's using the same language with that child, which works well for them. So all the things that I've spoken about, clear, direct instructions, visuals, a visual timetable, seating, praise, picking your battles, using a shared language, allowing manipulatives, and use of sanctions. So again, not every one of our children has this, only the students who need it have it. I don't believe in extra work unnecessarily, but for some of the students it does benefit them.
So what works well for JBS? Communication is really important, and Aisha and I and our counsellor will spend a lot of time communicating together, meeting to discuss students that we're concerned about. Being the school nurse, I'm in a very privileged position. I'm not an educator, so the students will often come and talk to me about their worries and their concerns, and that's really good because I can build up their trust. I've recently done a very interesting course called a listening skills course, and that's taught me an awful lot about communicating with students, the parents and the teachers to be effective in what I actually do. Parents themselves will often come to me because they know that I'm the ADHD support group here in Dubai, and they'll come and talk to me confidentially because a lot of parents here feel there's an awful lot of stigma to children coming to school. I'm recently getting lots of parents coming to me asking for help to place their children in schools. Should I disclose that my child has ADHD? And I will always tell them it's so important to disclose to the school that the student has ADHD. Schools here can only accommodate children if they've got the facilities and the staff to do that, and it's not fair on the other children in the class or that your individual child if the school can't accommodate them. But explaining that to them can actually make them feel so much better about it. So I work with them. Once I've gained their trust, then I can work with Aisha and we can work as a team together and work really well in supporting the parent and also supporting the student and supporting the teachers, because often teachers need support too. Recently did a study day, an evening through the ADHD support group for Arabic staff, explaining to Arabic staff how to support children and how to identify children who maybe had ADHD issues and actually help them. And that was really informative because many Arabic teachers I found don't often have the knowledge and understanding that other types of teachers have had in their teacher training too. So it's really important to share all of that knowledge with different members of staff so they can all help the child in the same way. So communication in the school is really important.
I think the only other thing to add there is we've also got a school counsellor. We're fortunate enough to have one this year and last year. So she's a valuable member of the team and is involved with ADHD children, because often there's a social emotional aspect there, or eventually after years of teaching they can feel a bit demoralised, like we can't get it right, whatever we try, and sometimes they say, like, I'm trying so hard but I can't control my hands, is what one of the children said to me. So having a counsellor, just somebody that they can go and talk to in confidence that they trust, is really, really crucial as well. Giving ownership back to them is what I started doing with some of the older children. It's harder with the younger children. With the older children, just putting it back to them, which is what the listening skills does. Okay, so you've said, you're not doing so well in this subject, and this subject. What can you do to change that? Because if it's an adult saying, do this, change this, have you tried this? It's not always sustained as easily. Whereas if it's something that they reflect on and they build on and they think about themselves, maybe I can try, maybe I won't sit next to, maybe I will do such and such to help me concentrate better, maybe I'll make sure I highlight my notes in the lesson so I know what I have to go home and review. If it comes from them, they're more likely to keep going with it and for it to be a successful strategy. And that's what the listening skills has trained us to be able to do. So not to offer advice to the students all of the time, but sometimes to say, okay, you've said such and such, what do you think you can do about it? Is there something that you can change? Is there something you need from me? And then moving it forwards that way. Like I said, we use professional expertise. We're not, the font of all knowledge. We're not equipped to diagnose. So using the expertise that's out there, Rachel has a professional contacts list that she shares through the ADHD support group, and that's something we share openly with all our staff and all our parents as well. So even if it's just somebody to talk to, somebody to bounce ideas off, or somebody to say, look, I'm worried about my child, I'm thinking maybe it may be a difficulty with this, what can I do, where do I go? Protocols, procedures, systems and structures, I think it's just having consistency and having transparency, and also the children knowing that you're going to be fair. That you'll be fair, but you'll be firm. So say, you've had your chances, so the consequence for such and such is such and such. So let's do this, and then next lesson we'll make sure we have a good lesson. We'll start as we mean to go on, we'll start well. So just always trying to keep it on a positive.
It's really touching now on the ADHD support group. The support group was started about 5 years ago here in Dubai. Because of a need for my own son, but it's quickly escalated. I've got over about 500 contacts now of people that use the support group in various ways. We meet each month during term time. We meet at Dubai British School, and then we also now have an adult support group that meets at Jumeirah Baccalaureate School. It's free, it's easy to access, and everybody's very welcome, even the teachers, TAs, ILSAs, as well as the parents. We have talks to support parents as well. We also just do a coffee and support meeting as well, and everybody's very welcome to come. The professional contact list is something that I share openly with everybody, and it's people that have been recommended. There are some great, amazing professionals out there in Dubai, and parents want to know who they can access and who's good at what they do. So I'm always happy to share those details with anybody. I do individual meetings, and I've met parents in coffee shops and cafes to support them, because there's still so much stigma associated with ADHD here. So a lot of parents don't want to come along to a meeting, but just want pointing in the right direction. And so I'm happy to accommodate anybody that needs that. I've left on it, most of the chairs, one of the contacts there for the support group. So please email me and I'll put you on my contact list, and I can share you the details of up and coming meetings. We actually have one on this Wednesday at Dubai British School. It's just a coffee and support. So it's just coffee, and parents come and chat about issues that they have, and we actually share ideas and support each other with that. So anybody is very welcome to come along to that. And then the meeting in March, in the beginning of March, is for adults, because as I said, many parents, while diagnosing their children, find that they've also got ADHD, and adults need that support structure too. So that's working very effectively as well. So please feel free to share this information with your learning support teachers, with any parents, with anybody that you feel would benefit from it. Everybody's welcome to come along and attend.
You've got a list of all these websites in your pack. These are just helpful sites. Some have useful strategies, some just have a lot of useful information. Rachel's support group is the top one, so that's there for your reference. And any questions, we will be happy to answer if we can. Yeah? Yep.
Did you say that you run groups during the day at your school for kids, or they're after hours?
The support group is for parents, so we meet at 7:30 in the evening, and it generally is for parents. A lot of parents would ask to bring along their children with them, but it's not effective. If you're trying to look after an ADHD child and take on board what's being said, it doesn't always work. We've tried to do meetings where parents would bring their children and socialise the children together, but it's something that's just never really taken off here. I think a lot of the time parents come to the meeting and they want to know which direction to move in. They want to know where can they get help, who's out there to help them. They want to know of schools that will actually support their children rather than try to expel them. And so in the meetings we can actually talk, we all talk openly and confidentially. I must state that everything that's said within the support group stays within the support group. We keep that information to ourselves, but we can all sort of say, yeah, this school's good, this school's good. No, this school isn't any good, they've just expelled my son. That, you know, so we share that information among ourselves so that we can support each other and help direct everybody in the right direction.
What's your take on medication for ADHD?
Initially, I was against medication. I have to say, my husband and I both were. My son, at the age of 3, started to have learning issues in school, and we've tried every alternative therapy under the sun. Kinesiology, brain gym, eurythmy therapy, eurythmy massage. We've done everything, herbal treatments, homeopathic treatments. And we got to the stage where we went to see a lady who held a wooden spoon in front of my son and held her hand on his forehead. And my husband said, I think we've gone a step too far now, let's stop and rethink this. So we actually looked back at what we were doing, and the doctor who I was working with at the time said, what about medication? And so he put me in contact with a paediatric psychiatrist here who said, why haven't you tried before? And I'd never even thought about it. Within an hour of my son starting medication, I had a different child. And I don't believe now, he's 16, he's just taking his GCSEs, and we're expecting A's and A stars. At the beginning of our journey, if you told me that that's where I'd be looking at now, I wouldn't have said that, because my son couldn't access the curriculum. He's ADHD inattentive, and he was always easily distracted. He couldn't pay attention. But I had to go through the whole journey before I came to the point of starting medication. And that's where I would say, if anybody says to me, should I always think you've got to follow the journey to get to that point to start medication. And then you know it's the right thing to do. And it doesn't always work for every child. Here in Dubai, medication is very limited, that we really only have Concerta or Strattera. Ritalin is very difficult to get hold of. Some doctors will try other medications as well, but the Concerta is predominantly the medication that we use here in Dubai. And as a parent whose son takes it, it changed my son's life, but it changed the whole family dynamics as well, because life became much more on an even keel for all of us. So I'm very pro medication, but as I say, it's not it wasn't an easy decision to make. No.
Do you face any side effects as a son?
My son's side effects is the Concerta medication is a long-acting medication, so he takes it at 6:30 in the morning, and then it lasts the whole time until he's finished his homework by about 4:30, 5 o'clock. His appetite is reduced during that time, but he'll munch throughout the day, and then in the evening I can't fill in. He'll have 2 big meals and a bowl of cereal and sandwiches and fruit and everything before he goes to bed. There are people that say their children have difficulties sometimes sleeping, but with any medication and any medical complaint, everybody deals with it differently. So I think it's really important that you see a paediatric psychiatrist for a child who can prescribe it and monitor it closely and advise you on the right way to give the medication and to deal with the side effects.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dosage can be changed. We've had students in school who it's not worked very well for. They've been very lethargic. They used to be hyperactive. They're not hyperactive anymore, but they're almost in a zombie state. Really, really passive. Everything's like, can't be bothered, don't care, but not disrupting the class. So although some teachers might prefer that, then speaking to the parents, they've gone back to the doctors again, they've readjusted medication, and they're now much more on an even keel and where they should be. So it's different for every student. We also have some parents who categorically say no.
If you look at the
Not trying
DSM
it.
guidelines and the NICE guidelines, they do recommend that you use alternative therapies to start off with, but one of the main ways to treat ADHD is by medication and putting in other strategies and learning support within the school. They often describe medication as putting the floorboards into a house, that you can't keep putting all the learning support in and all the additional help in because it keeps falling through. And once you put the medication in, it's actually the floorboards in the house so that all the other things are retained and their children will actually learn and improve. Yeah.
Will the medication be lifelong? And how does your son feel about being on medication?
No, lifelong. There are 3 types of ADHD, which we said, inattention, hyperactivity and combined. And they estimate that there's 3 possible outcomes for our children with ADHD. They grow out of it, they learn to manage the condition and learn to manage the symptoms, or they need help and support for all of their life. As it's an inherited disease, my son got it from myself and he got it from my husband. And my husband is a highly successful businessman. He has ADHD tendencies, but he's learnt to control it. And I believe with the medication, my son's learnt to control it. So, about 1/3 of children will generally need medication and support for the rest of their lives.
Anybody else? Yeah.
If a child demonstrates all the symptoms and behaviours that you said, and you know that child needs to be tested by a clinical psychologist or educational psychologist, and you try and say it in the most sensitive manner to the parents, and they don't want to actually admit that, even though you can actually film it and show them what they're doing, because the parents do not really know.
Yeah.
What suggestions have you got to actually encourage the parents to have them tested?
I would say softly, softly, gently, gently. I don't think you can steamroll in. The child who you've got the individual behaviour plan for, we identified, significant barriers to learning, and he's at age-related expectations, but was like the Tasmanian Devil. He was like a whirlwind. Every classroom was tipped upside down as soon as he was in there. Couldn't build social relationships with peers, couldn't play alongside others, was almost in his own world sometimes. We spoke to the parents when he joined the school 2 years ago about this, and they said, nope, he's not like that at home, must just be school. We said, okay, we'll monitor, we'll think of some strategies, we'll touch base again. So second semester, we had more or less the same conversation. They said, oh no, he's only like that sometimes when he's tired. So we said, okay, what are you doing at home that might be working? So then they shared some strategies. We said, okay, we'll try that. By the end of the second semester, we were saying, look, we're trying everything. We're almost exhausted with our strategies. We're not sure what to do. Would you consider this assessment, which will highlight your students' strengths, their preferred learning styles, any areas that we can help with? So that's how I always phrase it, because that is genuinely what the assessment will do. And then I said they will also give some strategies of things that you can do at home to help and things that we can do at school. So they agreed to the assessment, but then they refused to share the report with us, which is their right because they're paying for it. It then means we're still in the dark. So we're still in the dark. And then this year, so 3 years on, they shared one part of the report with us that had ADHD strategies. So that's all they've shared with us. So they've done the assessment. And I think it's just keeping the chains of communication open, having that ongoing dialogue. Somebody said it in another talk earlier today, making sure it's not always negative. So it's not such and such has done this again. Such and such wasn't paying attention in the lesson again. But, keeping it positive. You know what? They've got a really good handle on such and such. But, I found they, they weren't themselves this morning, or they found it harder to concentrate in the afternoon. So just keeping that information feeding through, and then just that constant suggestion of, would you consider, would you agree to, can we try, I can put you in touch with. And we always share, 5 or 6 different educational psychologists, and we say, speak to them all, see who you're most comfortable with. Prices vary, and obviously there's a cost attached, and kind of, let's just speak again next week and see where we go. So I think it's just softly, keep trying, and just keep re-emphasizing that we're all doing it to support the student, and they're the center of it. It's not for any other reason. We just want to help.
Like the same case you just explained, okay? The child is not listed, or you don't know the diagnosis report. So how do you support that child? You said you used every strategies there, and then you were like exhausted, and of course other students will also suffer from this.
Yep, and they did.
So how do you talk about it?
If you don't have a report in a diagnosis, all you can do is work with what you get, work with what you see. So you just respond to what you're seeing in classes. We have conference meetings. We have parent, student, teacher conference meetings every semester. And I email all the teachers who teach that child and say, please, can I have feedback about X? So tell me what they're doing well with, and tell me any challenges, any difficulties, any barriers. So I always phrase it like that. It's a simple table that I email out to every teacher. So positives, things going well, challenges, barriers, concerns. And then they feedback, and then I can speak to the parents and have slightly longer meeting than everybody else and say, look, they're doing really well in these, and share those. In PE they're doing this. In science they're doing this. But we're finding this, we're finding this, we're finding this. Shall we try this? Do you have any ideas? This is what we're going to do next. And you just have to keep trying. You can only work with what parents are willing to give you.
Yes, and if other students are suffering from this, then what do?
You work your way through that list of strategies in the back of your pack, slowly, and keep touching base with the child. Yeah, keep communication going. Okay, thank you.